What swords did the Vikings use? Hi guys, I am very privileged to be showing two Albion swords that are not owned by me. These are from my good friend Christian, and I need to send them to him, so we're going to do this very quick review. Some of you may have seen these on previous videos before. These are two swords from the Viking Age. Now, these were not necessarily used by Vikings specifically, and we'll get into that as we take a look at these swords. So we're going to start with the first one, and this is a quite long sword. This is a style of arming sword. This is the Albion Gaddhjalt. So what is this? This is a sword from the either 9th or 10th century. It is a single-handed sword. So again, we would call this an arming sword. Is this a Viking sword, or is this from Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Scandinavia? Quite possibly. So there are several different ways to categorize swords. There are different typologies of swords. We're going to talk about three of them today. There's the Peterson typology, there's the Wheeler typology, and there's the Oakeshott typology. This can be categorized using both Jan Peterson's typology and Oakeshott's typology. So the very end of Jan Peterson's typology that covers Scandinavian swords during kind of the migration and Viking period stops before the medieval period, and Oakeshott basically picks up right as Peterson's typology ends and covers the medieval period. And this sword overlaps between the two. Now, many people, when they think of a Viking sword from the Viking period, whether it's from the Viking area or whether it's from the Carolingian area on the continent, you know, a sword of the Franks or what have you, they'll think of a sword that has very small cross and a very kind of big pommel and a very short grip on it. This sword has a very big cross, like you would expect to see on a medieval sword with big shields, you know, fighting using knights on horseback. This is a sword from the very end of the Viking Age, and its name, Gaddhjalt, means spike hilt, and it's a name that we see in Viking sagas. So you can see it in Old Icelandic, for example. And we do have surviving hilts of this style that are even sharper than what has been rendered here by bladesmith Peter Janssen. Peter Janssen and Albion, I think, were perhaps a little friendly to consumers so that we don't stab ourselves. So there's a spectrum of these, and this would correspond to a Peterson type of hilt with the long, straight points and this type of pommel as a type 10. Using Oakeshott, we would call this Brazil nut style pommel, a form A pommel, and a style 1 cross. So right at the beginning, again, of the Oakeshott typology. And similarly, this would be an Oakeshott type 10 or type X blade, or actually an XA, so it's a 10A blade, since it's a longer version of these very long traditional Viking style swords. So this is the type of blade that we see. This general configuration of sword was used in a variety of areas. I've seen examples that look very similar to this found in Bulgaria, found in Romania. There's at least one sword that has this type of Brazil nut pommel on it, found in England. There's an example of a Gaddhjalt, of a spike hilt, that is held in the Royal Armouries collection in Leeds. So these are known in a variety of places, even though this particular type could well be attributed to quote-unquote Vikings from the very end of the Viking Age, again, going into the middle of the 11th century. So you've seen this sword perhaps on some of my other videos, but this is a sword with both a great deal of cutting potential to it, while still remaining maneuverable enough in the hand that you don't have to overcommit. It would make a good sword to be used from horseback, whether or not that was a popular type of fighting styles at the time. It has a broad central fuller running down the middle of it. It can give good point, but it has tremendous cutting capacity for delivering blows from behind a shield wall coming out and giving sweeping cuts. This particular example is beautifully executed. The grip wrap is done very, very nicely. Everything is tightly put together to the standards that we'd expect from Albion. All of the hilt elements are very well done. There's some very minor pitting on the way that the pommel is put together. The way that the blade is slotted into the hilt is very nice and tightly flush. Very mild amount of some of the adhesive residue shown in the gap where the fullering is. The fuller runs down the length of the blade very straight without much in the way of any wobble at all. And the edges are this is a sword design that's got very uniform edges running down the length with only a mild amount of taper. It does have distal taper, although not as much as later designs, resulting in a balance point that's reasonably far forward. It's got a balance point here of, I'll put it up on the screen for everyone to see. And as a result, there's a decent amount of flex in the blade, although not overly so much. So on the whole, this is a very fun sword. Now, what about this? Is this a knife or is this a sword? Well, I have avoided talking about Seax on the channel. And again, people are going to immediately say it's pronounced Seax or Seax. Apparently, in Old English, it's a diphthong, and it would be pronounced something like Seax. But I don't specialize in Old English, so feel free to correct me in the comments regardless. I have avoided studying Seax because traditionally I considered them knives, and I don't study knives, I study swords. And certainly enough, there are very short examples, blades that are maybe only a couple of inches long. As you can see, this is decidedly more than a couple of inches long. So this is based on a specific sword. This is based on a sword from Little Beedlings near Suffolk in England that Peter Johnson studied specifically. So this is the Brokeback Seax from Albion. And as soon as I got it, I was amazed at how large and intimidating it was. This is a blade that has a spine that starts 6 millimeters here and actually widens up to about 7 millimeters here and only gets down to maybe 3.7 millimeters way over here at the tip. And so when I picked it up, I'm like, is this a fighting knife or is this a sword? It comes in at almost 70 centimeters in length. So it's 68 something centimeters in blade length. And it handles very interestingly. And now let's continue. So we were talking about the specs and the handling characteristics of the Seax. And again, I want to take a quick moment to shout out to Mike over at Albion. When I first got this, and again, this isn't my sword, this is Christian's sword, I noticed that the specs were very slightly off compared to what they were listed on the website. And I contacted Peter Johnson, who designed this. And between he and Mike, we sent this back to Albion, and very quickly they put a little bit of work into it and returned it to me, and now this is a very faithful representation of exactly what the dimensions and specs are for the Brokeback Seax, the clip point Seax on Albion's website. So this is very faithfully representing the what Peter Johnson designed based on the example of the Seax in Suffolk. And it handles very unusually as a result of the way that it balances. Again, there's not a lot of mass here in the hilt like on a usual sword. So it does share a lot of properties with a knife, despite the fact that it's quite long. So I'm going to call this a short sword, even though it obviously has properties like a knife. So Seax have there's a couple different typologies. If we follow the Wheeler typology, this would be either a type 3 or a type 4, these ones that are clipped back. Or is this a Viking style one? No, this is characteristic of those found in England in the latter part of the Seax lifespan, so in the latter part of the 10th century. So would these two swords have interacted with each other? Yes, but only when Vikings were perhaps raiding England. So this blade, Seax again came in all sorts of shapes and sizes, from small utility knives up to this one, which is way too big for a utility knife. So this is a fighting weapon, and we have limited, depictions of how they were used in written sources or in art. Sometimes they're seen, with a sword in one hand and a Seax in the other hand. Sometimes there's a shield and a Seax. Sometimes they're just shown being used as a knife. So this could be either a backup weapon if your main weapon breaks, or it could just be used as a knife or a dagger, as we see in later treaties. There is limited indication that they are used in two hands. And again, this is a grip that can accommodate two hands. Now, when you pick up the sword, how it will handle will vary wildly depending on where you grab it. And again, because of the difference in not having something like a pommel here to counteract the mass of the blade, this is a reasonably wide blade. And usually in swords, you have thin blades when you have them very wide. This is a blade that starts at 6-something millimeters here at the shoulders, and it actually widens to 7 millimeters here at the peak, and it only goes down to maybe 3.8 millimeters when we're just a couple centimeters away from the tip. So this remains very, very thick for how broad a blade it is, and you don't have that mass to really change the balance of it, which means if you grab the Seax all the way down here and you try and swing it, you will get a lot of reach and you'll hit very hard, but it is going to take a long time to recover. If you hold it in the middle, it starts to improve a little bit, but it still will feel like a very slow blade. However, if you choke up to it all the way here, now it starts to behave similar to how some of the Chinese Dao that I'm used to working with do. It will pull a little bit in the hand, and to be honest, now the length of the handle is starting to act as a counterbalance to the rest of the blade, like you see in some Southeast Asian swords, like you see in Da, or even things like a wakizashi that have not a pommel, but do have the long tsuka, which comes out of the end of the sword, even though the proportions are very different. So this remains a very interesting weapon, and one that I was completely unprepared for when I picked it up. I don't think that the stats on the dynamics calculator that I show fully appreciate exactly how potent and powerful a weapon it is when you pick it up. It's almost 1,000 grams, which packed into this size weapon, it really packs quite a wallop, even though you are able to manipulate it if you hold it in the correct position. Just real quickly, again, it's very well put together. The fullering is done very nicely. The finish is the typical Albion satin, which is just lovely. All of the grip is in a great condition. The cross section of the grip that you might be able to see there is very ergonomic. It's not quite perfectly oval, with a widening on the side that form fits into the hand. We obviously have these 3 risers here to prevent hand slipping. And again, there's nothing from keeping your hand slipping up onto the grip. So we'll do a little bit of thrusting testing, but you only have this little riser here to prevent your hand from going all the way up. So if you hit something real hard, like mail or a shield or a helmet, there's nothing to keep your hand from just sliding up onto the blade. So that is something to be aware of if you were going to ever do significant thrusting testing with a sword like this. Now that said, there is a wicked point on this particular example, which is a little different than some of the other types of long Seax, like the Scandinavian types usually are a little bit more round, so that they have more cutting potential towards the end, but less of an acute point, and perhaps we're not as adept at thrusting. But since this is a later design, perhaps there's more mail going on. Maybe they're encountering more mail, and they're expecting to need to give everyone a sharp point. So Let's take both of the blades out and do a little bit of chopping and stabbing and see how they perform, and then we'll wrap it up. So I have my shield in front of me, and I want to just give a quick stab with the Seax. No problem. It's going in so clean that it's barely even leaking any water. Now, can I deliver a snapping cut? Let's see. I did, and I cut with the crescent part of the blade, and it caused a decapitation, but it caused a little bit of a scoop. Coming from underneath. Not too bad. I used a lot of acceleration there, and again, I'm cutting with the latter part of the blade. The sweet spot is around here or so, so I probably am still cutting a little too shallow. But a very clean cut. Went through very well. Can I do a Chinese head wrap? Not quite for that last one. All right, no problem stabbing through the harder plastic. This time we cut most of the way through, but did not. It looks. You can see that the cut went right into the very thickest part of the plastic. Fortunately, caused no damage whatsoever to the blade. Albion makes a very tough sword. Moving on to the Gaddhjalt, holding it in a nice hammer grip. So obviously I took the top off very easily with the first strike. I didn't swing particularly hard on the second strike, but I just love the song that it makes every time it goes through a target. Yep. No problem at all. This is a powerful cleaving sword. The edge on it is nice and sharp, and it just sings when it sails through the targets. Okay, this is a slightly different target. I have no idea exactly how this is going to work. This is a half-frozen pumpkin. It has warmed up enough that the pumpkin has started to thaw, but the inside is still kind of frozen. Don't know what the consistency is going to be like. It's not like a traditional pumpkin. We're going to start by thrusting, see how the swords do. And again, the goal is that I'll give it a big thrust, and the pumpkin should not fall off, and we'll see how far up the blade the pumpkin juice goes. So I started to scoot the pumpkin back, and we went that far, which is about 10 centimeters or so. It's a pretty good spike, gotta say. I think we have a winner. Now remember that Brokeback Seax is quite thick on the spine, and that thickness prevents over-penetration, but it also just prevents penetration in general. So we have 10 centimeters. I don't know if you can see the marks. They're left behind, but we have about 10 centimeters on the Seax and about 25-something centimeters on the Gaddhjalt. So significantly more penetration coming from the Gaddhjalt than the Seax on this stabbing test. And again, that's because even though on profile, the Seax looks like it's very pokey compared to this kind of rounded tip, but when we turn it over in cross section, this is way thicker and offering a lot more resistance. It's stiffer, but it's offering more resistance, and this is very thin and easy to slip in. That's a weird consistency. I don't think I've hit something with that consistency before. It's got the consistency of, I don't know. It's very thick all the way through. It's almost like hitting a bag of sand. So I can try just hitting it one-handed, but because it's so dense, I don't think that the sword will go all the way through. I can try. Wow, that was great. Okay. Apparently it can even make it all the way through that pumpkin. Who knew? I didn't expect that given how much resistance I had two-handing it, but that just goes to show you. So it's a little cumbersome. You can strike with a lot of force, but not necessarily, I'm not particularly adept at accelerating it this way. Whereas I have no problem accelerating it one-handed, assuming I'm holding it in the right place. Huh. Interesting. So I can pack a wall up like this, but because it's so short, it's a little bit tricky to redirect. This is a very interesting sword. Another frozen pumpkin? Yeah, no problem for the Gaddhjalt. I'm not sure if the camera's picking it up, but you can actually see the ice crystals on the pumpkin rind. Yeah, this I'm feeling almost no resistance even from this very thick pumpkin. This is just a very, very powerful cleaving blade, and I'm risking over swinging. Like I can do a very light swing, and just the weight of the sword itself is enough to cleave through this particular target. So there we have it. These are two very different types of swords from the Viking age. One from the continent, one from England. Both have different design philosophies. Both are probably intended to be used with a shield in front of them. They have different approaches to hand protection. We start seeing the beginnings of the arming sword with this one. Do we know why guards went from being very short to very wide? That's a topic for a different story, but both of them have very powerful ability to cleave. So don't think that cutting power is something that you only see in big curved sabers. A double-edged straight sword has lots and lots of cutting power if the geometry allows it. Hope everyone enjoyed this, and we'll be back here for another sword review next time. Take care, everybody.